Good morning. Thank you. So, welcome to the 30th Annual American Express Restaurant Trade Program. Let's give context. I'm sure we all think about sustainability. And there's not too many things that are around for 3 decades. So let me do this one more time. Welcome to the 30th American Express Restaurant Trade Program. Thank you. All right. All right, thank you. Bring the energy up. So I'm Gunther Bright. I have the privilege of leading the U.S. Merchant Services business for American Express. And restaurants are a really large and important segment of American Express merchant family, and we're committed to backing growth and innovation within the industry. The American Express Restaurant Trade Program is core to that backing, acting as a platform for chefs and restaurateurs to connect and discuss the most important and relevant topics in the dining industry. This morning, our esteemed first panel, you'll hear from some of the dining's strongest players and how they found long-term success and recognition. I'm excited to join this audience to hear more about how these industry stars have defined their own path to success. And just as an aside, do you all categorize yourselves as stars? No. Okay, that would be faux humility, just so you know. But backing the vision of merchant partners is a top priority for us. We bring our merchants new and repeat customers from our higher spending card members through dining benefits, premium offers, exclusive access. And in fact, according to a recent study, U.S. American Express card members reported that they spend 90% more on restaurant purchases than non-U.S. American Express card members. Now, I'll shortly hand over the spotlight to the talented Carla Hall, the host of the first panel, to discuss the visions of leading restaurateurs. But before I do that, I'd like to share with you a short video highlighting some of our favorite moments from past years at this program. Now, this year will surely carry on important conversations we've started in the past, but I hope you join me in the excitement about what's to come over the next few days. Why don't we cue up the video? American Express actually can create a platform for transparency.
I always like to take this time, and especially with the topic that this panel is about to engage in, to especially call out American Express, because there is a very large company that wants to support these conversations, that wants to support building community.
I'm gonna hire different, but I would make a platform for people of colors, and I would make sure that at least I run a 50-50 kitchen with women and a bunch of delicious schmutz.
Exactly what the restaurant community does. They work tirelessly, they serve all of the time, and they help.
You need to create the thing that you want to have and then hope that other people will want to have it as well.
That experience, that story, that connection creates luxury.
Our ability to tell stories is super important.
I think it's storytelling, storytelling, storytelling.
Wouldn't it be cool if?
What is relevant?
How do we stay true to ourselves? What is our core mission? What is our value? And what is really the nugget of truth?
Hire hard, train easy. Hire easy, train hard.
Setting that expectation really reduces the risk that they're going to be let down.
You know, I think opening a restaurant will connect you with community in a way that is so different than anything else.
Keep your ego at the door and understand that anyone's idea could potentially be better than yours. That's the most important thing.
I find ideas to be the most stimulating ways that human beings can connect with each other.
Thank you. That's a great video. I'm just looking at my colleagues here. I didn't see the video. The beginning was quite self-serving for American Express, but it's okay. So let's get this panel started. Carla is a contributor on GMA Day and was formerly a co-host of ABC's Emmy Award-winning popular lifestyle series, The Chew. Carla is perhaps the best known as a competitor on Bravo's Top Chef and Top Chef All-Stars, where she won over audiences with her philosophy to always cook with love. Carla's approach to cooking blends her classic French training and Southern upbringing with a twist of traditional favorites. What an underachiever Carla is. With that, please welcome Carla.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is quite an honor to have you all. I have Will Guidara of Make It Nice, Ellen Yin of a High Street Hospitality Group, Ashley Christensen of Ashley Christensen Restaurants, and Steve Palmer of the Indigo Road Hospitality Group. Thank you all. It is such an honor. Today, I want to kick it off because we were talking earlier, Steve and Ellen, about it's all about the recovery. And I think that this audience sees your success. You know, when you have a restaurant group with lots of restaurants, and you know, James Beard Award nominees and wins. Ashley, congratulations. You know, all of you all. You know, to your nominations. It seems a lot easier on that side. But talk to me about some of your failures and accomplishments and when you recovered and how that recovery actually led to your next opportunity. Go, Will, be fabulous.
Sweet. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my old boss and mentor, Danny Meyer, one of his things was the road to success is paved with mistakes well handled. And I think that's true. I think if you look at our restaurants, our biggest regulars are generally the ones that started out as having the worst experiences. And I think there's two ways that I think about that. One is, listen, you're not doing what we do unless there's some profound and unreasonable competitiveness within you. And I think that when you stumble or when you fall, that competitiveness makes you want to get up and try even harder to succeed. It's certainly the case with a guest who comes in and doesn't love their first experience. I'm working through this in therapy right now, but I have an unbelievable need to be liked. And so when someone comes in and they don't like it, that gets me fired up to want to just do better and reach deeper and perform at a higher level. But
So does that mean that you focus on I know you focus on the people who like it, but that maybe that 0.5% or that 1% who is not having a good time and you focus on them to get better?
Well, I think it's something that we struggle with. I struggle with as a manager, as a leader, as an operator, is that, and it's something we talk about in our company all the time. When I walk into 11 Madison Park, I notice first the things that are not right before I then pause to celebrate the things that are right. I think it's the case in managing people. If I don't check myself, I will sometimes call out people on the mistakes they're making before I take time to celebrate all the things they're doing well. One of the things we talk about is we better be complimenting the people that work for us more than we're criticizing, otherwise they shouldn't work there anymore. And so, yeah, I think now, I think I'm answering like 4 questions simultaneously right now. But yeah, I think that part of what we do is there's a bit of perfectionism in it that needs to be regularly checked to make sure that it doesn't get the better of you, because it can result in you not being the best version of yourself. And the mistakes are generally ones that you focus on the most. It's like, what is the squeaky wheel gets the whatever? There's some... Grease, thank you.
Oh, the squeaky wheel. I was like, the sweetie bill.
The sweetie bill gets the squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's true.
Yeah,
I think
the squeaky wheel,
I think generally you focus on the things that are not going well and try to improve them as opposed to making sure. We say this thing all the time that baseball players, they always go to the tapes when they've had a bad game to see what they're doing wrong, but they should more often be going to the tapes when they've had a good game to make sure that they continue doing those things well. But to answer the question you actually asked in the beginning, yeah, we've made a bunch of mistakes. We've had really, really challenging moments. We've gotten terrible reviews when we thought we were...
Is there some really big thing that I think the audience can latch onto that stands out in your mind that And I could come back to you because you've already talked like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Come back to it.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, I can answer the question or someone else can answer. Those are the two options.
I was going to say, what is failure? I mean,
Right.
you know, what is failure? Failure, I try not to use that word because every day I walk into the restaurant or restaurants and, you know, there's an obstacle. And if you let that weight of that obstacle, regardless of how big it is, kind of get you down, you won't be able to move forward. And I think that's the trait of a successful restaurateur is really, you know, being able to look at problems. We're problem solvers, you know. And for me, I mean, you know, starting in 1997, you know, with, you know, my first restaurant and to where I am today, I'm not nearly as, you know, I don't have 20 restaurants, but, you know, I think of myself as, you know, I'm always trying to overcome what I personally interpret as my own failure, but trying to make a plan and move it forward. And that might be, you know, our team, it might be hiring, it might be financial, whatever it is. I mean, everybody in this room knows how difficult this industry is, so we don't need to go there. Yeah.
I think it's also, I know for me, it depends on are you leading from a place of like authenticity and genuinely wanting to please a guest and or make your, I always equate that the employee has to be happy first, very much a Danny trait. But, you know, are we leading from a place of ego or are we leading from a place of authenticity? Ego is you know, I always talk about when leaders don't want feedback. They don't want to hear that the dish wasn't perfect. The manager wants to argue about whether the steak was cooked the way they ordered it. You know, that's all insecurity. When a leader doesn't want to hear feedback from their own team, hey, you said you were going to do this and you didn't, or did you follow up on that thing? You know, when you're leading from a place that, you know, I say it all the time, you know, I've grown this company, I've never done this before. And when you're the leader of your organization, everybody's looking at you for the answers and you're sitting there going, I have no idea what I'm doing. I think I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing, you know. And so I think there's that willingness to be wrong and to be vulnerable and real. And sometimes that's just, you know what, you're right, we screwed it up. I am so sorry. And I agree with Will. Our best customers were the ones that hated us the most. But it was how we responded. Did we respond with, you know, we don't get to be right. If the steak was medium rare and they thought it was medium well, guess what? We can argue about that and then they're not going to come back. So at the end of the day, what place are we coming from in here? Is it an arrogance of look who we are, or is it like we genuinely want to connect with people? And sometimes we're going to get that wrong, and it's okay to say that.
I also think that greatness in our industry comes from taking chances, and it can't just be in leadership. We have to, you know, inspire our teams to take chances and to make mistakes. And the cool thing about the business that we're in is we have all the tools to fix something. And so I think when you have a hospitality experience that feels like that whole room is wrapped around you and involved in what's happening, it's because there are people taking chances, and there's you know, there's some just energy and that the freedom to do the job we set out to do. And I think it is one of the hardest things to get your team comfortable with the idea of like problem solving in the moment and doing the thing that they believe should happen regardless of what they think you might have done were you standing there.
Well, and how do you foster that? Because I think having really good staff and wanting people to make basically the recovery and have ownership of a decision in the moment, you hope for that. But how do you foster that? How do you help train your staff to own their decisions that you as the leaders would want them to make?
I think you know.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Will.
No, no, go ahead, Ashley.
No, I think that you have, you find a way to have comfortable, open dialogue and communication. And to your point, it's so, you know, we have these constant management meetings inspired by a lot of the conversations that have happened on this stage. And our recent focus is giving positive feedback, you know, that we focus on how to fix things and repair things, but to focus on positive feedback, because
that creates a more open dialogue for everyone to feel safe in talking about that chance they took or why it didn't work, and then we take it back to the table and figure out how to do it better next time. You know, and we've got, like everyone here, more than one restaurant, so there are constant conversations going on. We depend on technology a lot for that communication. So getting everyone to a place where they're cool with feeling vulnerable to that conversation, and we make more progress with that every day. But you know, we can't fix it and make better decisions the next time if we can't all feel comfortable being honest together about how it went down, whether it worked or whether it didn't. And so I think just, man, that big old box of getting everyone comfortable with communicating and dialogue is, to me, sort of sits in the heart of that.
Yeah, feeling safe.
I think also what you said, failure is a pretty bad word.
Right.
There's not really failures so much as there are setbacks. I saw Alain Ducasse speak years ago, and he said that they run their company with the full knowledge that they will close restaurants from time to time. Because if they don't, it means they played it too safe with all of their decisions and they never pushed the boundaries far enough. I think the same thing applies to decisions we make in the restaurants. We call them in our restaurants hospitable leaps of faith. Sometimes I'd rather err on the side of leaning in too much to try to connect with someone in some sort of authentic and personal way and occasionally creep them out than to like talk ourselves out of ever doing anything cool in pursuit of a relationship with a guest. And the point of not referencing it as a failure but calling it as a setback is people are very, very scared of failure.
Yeah.
A setback is just a setback. And so if you tell your team, hey, every once in a while you're going to fall flat in your face. You're going to like reach out and there's not going to be someone there and you're going to fall. But you know what? When you do, we got you.
Yeah.
And giving them a sense of ownership where they get to decide when they take those leaps of faith and when they don't, or when they do fall short, what they do to correct. Listen, I don't think it's possible to be great at what you do unless you have some level of creative control in what you're doing. And so I think it's so important to give that autonomy and give that ownership, give them the tools to succeed, and then understand that sometimes there are going to be setbacks.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. I want to let you all know and just invite you to ask questions throughout, because I don't want to wait to the very end and you're trying to remember your question. So if you have a question and you want to jump in, this really should be a dialogue. And I'm moving my mic over here. This really should be a dialogue. So please feel free to jump in there. There's a microphone on either side of the room, okay? So let's talk about then the culture of your restaurants. And you all have several restaurants. And does the culture change based on the city? I know most of you have multiple cities. Does the culture change per city in terms of the hiring and the people in that city, and how do you navigate that?
I think.
Go ahead.
Yes, but I don't think your values should change. I don't think your true north for us, it's always about hospitality. We have different styles of restaurants. Some bear the same name, but they're a different design, a different chef. And we always say our hospitality should be standard. How we treat each other is like the non-negotiable. You know, in a steakhouse, we have a 15-year-old steakhouse. We have 40-year-old waiters. We also have a Japanese sushi concept where the average age is 24, 25. It's a different, they're experiencing life at a different pace. You know, the guys in the steakhouse, this is the guys and girls, this is their career. The ones in the sushi bar are working in Atlanta, they're actors and actresses, and in Charleston they're in college, and so it's a different, but I don't think your values. We serve food at a lot of different levels, a lot of different price points. How we approach the way we run our business doesn't change.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, the challenge is, of course, as everyone in this room probably knows, is finding the right people and going through the interviewing process and being able to identify people who maybe they're not the perfect candidate right now, but they can be nurtured and trained and developed into somebody who falls under the culture. And everybody knows Danny Meyer's philosophy on that. You can't teach hospitality. You can teach steps of service. But inherently, that desire to please and that desire to want to satisfy, and going back to correcting customer complaints and potential failures, feeling that you're empowered to make the right decision from day one, that no one's going to fire you for being empathetic to the guest and trying to do the right thing for the guest. That's the right decision, is doing that. Finding these people that you can, embrace and put into this culture, I think, is the most difficult challenge right now.
So can you give like some practical examples and best practices of if you're interviewing somebody and they're coming to you, what do you look for? I mean, what are the questions that you ask? I mean, how do you pull that out of this individual who's coming into to basically, it's a chess move, right? Because they're coming to you, but you need to see 5 steps down the road to see if that person is good, and just retaining good staff.
I think one question is how do they deal with difficult situations? Because when it comes down to it, I would say that 80% of customer interactions that we have don't follow perfectly the steps of service. So how do you deal with a difficult situation, and how do they feel comfortable? I mean, in a way, you're almost, when you're interviewing somebody, not trying to catch them off guard, but you're trying to see what do they do when they're really uncomfortable, and how are they going to react?
Ashley, any?
I was just going to say to the first question, we're only located in one city, and we're constantly working on elevating, the culture of our company. We're very transparent about it. We try and utilize our platform to share as much of what we're going through or challenged by, or where we're experiencing victories. We try and share that with the industry as a whole. But we're only in one city, but I'm constantly having conversations with leaders all over the country. And it feels like everything that we're figuring out or challenged by, everyone's experiencing the same thing everywhere, which is daunting and comforting. That this is, when we mentioned someone like Alain Ducasse closing a restaurant, you hate to hear of a restaurant closing, but it's actually like a really humanizing thing for folks who look up to the giants to know, like, this is a reality of this business. And so I think that I think there's just truth to the fact that we are in different communities, but we're all working towards the same cultural standards, challenged by a lot of the same things. So,
Will, did you have something to say? You don't have to.
On the interview question?
No, but I mean, I thought you looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, the interview thing I think is so interesting. When I was coming up, I would always try to figure out what were my interview questions. I think that's natural. When you first start doing anything, you want to have these things that you can lean on before you're super confident in doing it. I think as I've grown in my career, my interview questions become simpler and simpler. I think of it effectively as a first date. You're just trying to get a sense of, here's the thing, I don't believe that you can't train hospitality. Perhaps train isn't the right word. I believe that you can encourage hospitality. I believe that everyone is inherently hospitable. Perhaps they just haven't known what it's like to receive it for so long that they've stopped giving it. I have this philosophy that if for a month there was some national mandate where everyone had to be really, really nice to everyone that worked at the DMV, I think the DMV would be one of the happiest places on earth. But obviously, no one wants to go to the DMV, so we're all dicks to the people that work at the DMV, and then they, in turn, give that back to us.
Yes.
And so when I'm meeting with someone, I think of it like a first date, because you don't go on a first date and say, so, let's talk about conflict resolution.
If you're online dating, you do.
Perhaps. But I think of the relationships we have with the people we work with, we should be pursuing them in somewhat of a similar fashion to the way we pursue the relationships in our lives outside of work. We throw around the word family as ways to describe our restaurant companies, and I think too often that's like, it's not actually sincere. And I think if you meet someone, if they seem like someone you want to spend time with, they seem like they're kind and they're smart and they're hardworking and they're humble enough to want to open their minds up to whatever you have to teach them. And then you're prepared to invest in them both from a graciousness perspective and from a education perspective. I think it's as simple as that.
I think one of the really interesting challenges about interviewing, though, is, and it's something to be broken down, and I hope that we can do it as an industry. I think people are like fired up and trained to go try and get a job, whether they want it or not. So I think a big part of the interview process is to your idea of that, getting to know someone, figuring out if you're right for each other. You know, figuring out if this is the place that is going to bring out the best in that person. And I want to figure out how we each look for what we're looking for, and that we can be honest about that, because I do, you know, folks will sit down and say, this is the only place I want to work.
Right.
They might work there for 2 weeks and then get that offer that they really wanted,
Right.
leave,
Right.
you know, but and they say all the magic words, but you know, I want to make folks, and our team want to make folks feel really comfortable to like really let out the things they're looking for. And it's always hard to ask those questions like, what are your long-term plans? You know? But figuring out who people really are, what makes them, you know, what drives them through the work and gets people excited about doing what they do every day. So I'm constantly working on ways to dial in deeper to a more honest conversation in the interview to make sure that this is in fact the job that would help that person to feel successful.
Right. Because if it is like dating, it's a two-way street. So the person coming in can't just choose you, and you can't just choose them.
Yeah.
It really is you choosing each other and making sure that you share with the person coming in, this is who we are. Like, let's say like if I'm doing a recipe and I love lemon. I love lemon. My recipes are going to be sour and lemony forward. If you don't like lemon, you're not going to like my recipe. Right? You know, so how do you basically communicate that so that you can not only help them, you're helping them help themselves, and they're helping you help yourself by trying to communicate that. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you all have been in the game for a long time. Has finding staff changed? So from 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Ellen, to now, you know, how has that changed? And how, I mean, your practices may be the same, your culture may be the same, but how does it change in this environment with a lot of food cities popping up? And you're in DC, and I know 1 year, and I live in DC, there were 500 restaurants that opened. That's crazy, right? How do you find people for that? People will leave you for a nickel.
Right.
So, so let's talk about that. How has it changed from 15 years ago to now, and how have you navigated that?
Well, it used to be that everybody just walked in your door and applied. People would come in and you know, they came in at 5:30. You would be like, have you worked in a restaurant before? Or, you know, but, you know, things have obviously changed. I mean, we have tried so many different ways to try to, you know, bring in new applicants and different applicants from pools that maybe we hadn't previously considered. So all the obvious ways, online, you know, online recruiting, but also we developed a, you know, a internship program with the Culinary Institute, you know, looking at local high schools now and how we could potentially bring in perhaps kids who are not familiar with the hospitality industry, but who may want to investigate that as a, you know, viable, you know, career choice. And, you know, but going back to what you were saying, you know, explaining to people what that culture is and communicating what that culture is so that you can pair up properly is a really difficult challenge. I mean, I've never seen it like this before, where we run an ad in Culinary Agents, 10 people apply, and we bring them all in for an interview, and none show up. I mean, like nobody showed up.
Mind-blowing.
It is at a new level.
Yeah.
I mean, the work, but what that says to me is some kind of a work ethic. And so, and if that is the environment and that is the culture, and you talk about hospitality and how it's different. I mean, hospitality has changed over the years, and sometimes people don't understand that. So when you talk about reaching out to a group that you wouldn't have reached out to. You are basically grooming them to work in the hospitality industry or to work at your restaurant.
I don't, you know, I said this about 2 years ago to our HR director. I have nothing to say about recruitment. There's not, I don't think I'm going to come up with a silver bullet that is going to make everybody want to work. So we better be retention enthusiasts. And you know, and so we started, you know, we're helping we're loaning them the money to buy homes. We're paying for culinary school. We're doing these things that like are so beyond, you know, listen, a hamburger still costs what a hamburger costs. I can't just pay everybody more, but I can figure out other ways to show people I care. I liked Will's word, to invest in them, and with the hopes that they're going to invest in our restaurants. And I do an orientation every month to talk about our values. 100% of the time, our best employees are referrals from our current employees. There's and so, and no disrespect to Indeed or Culinary Aid, I mean, that's not going to solve our problem. It's getting people to want to come and stay. It's once they get them in the door, and that's where I said that's above my pay grade. I don't. We're literally we hired an executive chef last week to just travel around and go where we are the most short-staffed, because we are running restaurants at levels, no dishwashers, 2 line cooks, that I've just never. And so I don't think I'm going to wake up tomorrow and go, this is how I'm going to get people to apply. It's once they have applied and once we have said, these are people we care about, how can we keep them and how can we care about them more?
Well, that definitely is one major challenge, because you know you want to keep your employees and you want to nurture them to continue growing. And probably one of the biggest challenges that we've seen is, okay, you're a line cook. How do you get to be that sous chef? How do you develop the skills? Because no one's handing them to you, and maybe you've never looked at it from that perspective. My business partner started this program where he wants to try to train line cooks or aspiring managers to try to, like, you know, be trained in management skills, basically. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem. We have tons of talented people who can cook and who can serve, but how do they then inspire their team to get to the next level? And you know, if I knew the answer to that.
But is that done outside of a regular day? Is that a specific program that he says, okay, once a week, you know, twice a month, you know, we're going to take you out and we're going to take you through these things? How do you navigate that?
We had it as an addition to their program, but they understood, because we brought in an outside trainer, that it was an investment in themselves, and that it was something that if they took the time to work at, that, you know, that at the end of the day that they would benefit. And you know, I think that people who want to grow, and younger people these days, I do feel that the ones who are driven to succeed, they want to see how they are going to get from point A to point B. And if you can't paint that picture for them, then it's really easy to lose them and lose them to another group where everybody's looking for great people.
And you and I think, talked about this on a panel a little bit in Chicago, but I've been thinking a lot about, when we talk about retention, that our field has historically painted the picture of success as you're a cook, and then you are a sous chef, a chef, an executive chef, an owner, and that's sort of like, that's the path of success. And I'm very interested in, and I think it's a thing we have to challenge ourselves to do when we look at each role in the restaurant, that we find a way to create opportunities for success with path forward, not just ladder up, because not everyone is meant to be a manager. And when you really like dig in and do the work to solve the challenges of how to get people, young managers, more comfortable managing, it's a whole different set of skills, and also, you know, it's a whole different thing that, you know, whatever it is in our brains that makes us feel happy, you know, it's different for everyone. And so I think as leaders, one of the things I really want us to be thinking about right now is how do we look at each role, and for folks who don't want to be managers but love the thing they do, how do we keep that challenging and fulfilling and rewarding for everyone involved? And that to me is one of the greatest opportunities for retention.
So, well, speaking of that, the first thing that comes to mind, if you have a line cook and you have this lateral move, then, and they want to make more money. Do they make more money in that lateral move? You know, so what does that look like?
I think definitely, yeah. And I don't know where the, I've not solved this. I'm working through it, but
we're here to help.
But yeah, I mean, I think there are opportunities that don't involve managing other people that can entail more responsibility and more pride for the job you're doing, and I think that can continue to be a growing financial path as well. Okay. And think about, and one of the ways that you create value in that is think about how expensive it is to replace someone, to hire someone, to go through that process. And you know, we've been very focused on building our bench, having more managers than we need, identifying the lead line cooks, the service captains, all the folks who we can let them put a toe in that pool and decide if they like the way it feels, you know, and then we can keep growing in that direction. But when a manager even gives you a 2-month notice, it's really hard to fill a management position with the right candidate in 2 months, you know. So I think, yeah, that investment is worthwhile.
It's really interesting. We have a Nomad in Las Vegas, and we're partnered with MGM, huge organization. And there's this big thing that they're doing called MGM 2020 Initiative. And I knew about it because one day I got a call, and 400 managers from MGM were laid off in a single day.
Oh, wow.
I was like, what? But the more I learned about it, the more it was actually kind of a progressive thing. So like any big company, there are levels in their hierarchy. And within each level, apparently there was like a $10,000 range that you could be paid. And so once you got to the top of that, the only way to get a raise was to actually get promoted to the next level in the hierarchy. And so what was happening over the course of the last 15 years is they were promoting people to not lose them into positions that they weren't ready for. And then because they weren't crushing it, because they were never ready for it, they'd have to hire more people. Right. And suddenly there were redundancies on every single level. And it's not actually out of the ordinary for companies to work like that, where there's pay ranges within each level in the hierarchy. And they laid off all those people because they've learned that that structure doesn't work, and they're completely destroying it and starting over again in pursuit of people being able to grow financially while still growing laterally. So all to say that you and one of the largest employers of hospitality professionals in the world, you guys are aligned.
You know, the labor rates and what waiters make, everybody's dealing with it. Let's talk about the different rates, especially in different cities. You're in all over the Southeast, right. You know, DC, you know, as well as Nashville. You're in Philly and New York. You're all in Raleigh, so yours should pretty much be the same. You're in different cities. Do those rates, are they different, and how do they affect your company being very different, which is this price structure?
The minimum wage in DC is going to 14 July 1. It's 7 everywhere else we are, and our waiters are at the 213 plus the, you know, so it's a sobering reality, and I'm not debating the merits of whether we need to be doing this and all of that. It's just when you're running a business and suddenly you're looking at minimum wage is 2.5, 3 times. It affects you. You know, it affects the way you run business. I mean, on top of when you don't even have enough people to pay the minimum wage, it affects you in lots of ways. You know.
Well, we're just a small restaurant in the West Village of New York, and we had our butts kicked because we're used to Philadelphia, where servers are all $3 an hour. Now they're $10 an hour. So it used to be where maybe you have a service problem. Put 3 more people on there, no problem. But we're looking at how can we alter our service model to meet this goal. And one thing I saw in Denver the other day was this counter service model. And I really tried hard to look all over the country for examples of people in upscale environments where they were doing counter service. And is there a way to you know, really be creative about the service model to make the labor model work. Because in the end, like you said, a burger is going to be $15 to $18, whatever market you're going to be in. Customers aren't going to pick up that, and you know, the economy is shifting. How are we going to, like, you know, how are we going to succeed? I think that is a major problem. If you can tell me, help me.
No, I'm just listening because, okay, I've only operated in New York, and then we opened in California and Vegas. And then I was like, oh my gosh, New York is so inexpensive. And then you guys are saying $2.10 and $3. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, we're moving down south.
I'm south, young man.
Do you guys know Jamie Malone in Minneapolis? So she's a pal of ours, and we've been talking a lot about these kinds of challenges and issues. And she has Grand Cafe, where I think in that state, like the staff has to like unanimously vote to do this, which her staff did. I think that I feel like it was her staff's idea, but they tip pool and they have percentages that go to the kitchen. And it's like a really nice balance, but they have to vote regularly to say that they want it to continue, and they can call the vote. And the last time they called the vote, she was like, oh, this is working so beautifully, I'm afraid they're gonna take it away. And they came to her and said, we want to tip the kitchen more. And I don't know, there's something, we've been thinking a lot about it. We're working on our structure for the next, for our restaurant that's gonna open in about a month and a half or 2 months. And for us, it means that we turn down the tip credit, so we don't pay $2.13. We would pay all servers minimum wage, and we create a structure, you know, standard minimum wage or more. We create a structure that would balance some of what has been well out of balance with the kitchen and the dining room. Yeah. I can't talk exact numbers right now until we finish pulling it apart and figuring it out, but we're excited to like make that leap, and we hope to be able to prove in that project something very positive that then we can possibly, you know, it's hard to go to the other shops that are existing, and that's a tough nut to crack, I think, but I'm excited to figure it out.
It sounds exciting. What do you all think about that? Hello?
Any suggestions are open.
You know, interestingly enough, and I hope this is changing, we have a restaurant in Charleston called the Macintosh where the servers would tip out the kitchen every night. We got audited by the labor board, and we got fined for doing it. So I'm all ears on how this model works.
Yeah, and we've met with Labor Council on this.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a huge, when we look at our labor line, it's a really big investment. We look at that big number and we go, who do we want to be? Let's do it.
But I think
because what we believe is ultimately
right.
What that will result in is that, you know, longevity of career for folks who are there, a overwhelmingly incredible experience for the guest based on everybody being all in. And you know, we work very hard not to have a division between service and kitchen, but the money can make that tough for folks. So I'm excited to get cracking on that issue.
But I think if it works, and if there's a pilot program in a particular city, and then it is about the labor boards, then maybe this is something that chefs can lobby for, you know, in different cities, especially if you have multiple units. Yeah. Well, let me ask you a tough question. You talk about Alain Ducasse and how he operates his restaurants as if they're going to end. At what point would you decide to close a restaurant or abandon a project?
I've closed one.
Well, I have too.
Yeah, and it was.
Me too.
It was an interesting thing to stare down. We had a coffee shop that we wanted to like take away this having your name yelled. We wanted to like wrap a lot of hospitality around it, and we had great food and we did dinner. And I realized later that the mistake that I made is I should have opened a restaurant and added a coffee counter, because we could never get people out of this mindset that this was a daytime place. So we finally got it running well, and we made just a little bit of money, and we asked ourselves, we're pouring so many resources, we got this big company, and the big thing is like, how do you make yourself, how do you have enough people available to mentor all the things we're talking about in the restaurants? And we were putting all this energy as a director team into this one shop, that was finally like barely breaking, just above breaking even. And at that time, we had my first sous chef at Pool's Diner when we opened was the chef of this coffee shop. He was looking at a spot, 10 blocks away that didn't look like it was going to be the greatest or easiest project for him to enter as his first project. And I just, with my team, sat and talked about it and said, what if we sold this thing to Sonny for the remainder of our debt? And what if we financed it to him? And so we got to do that. And it wasn't, it's a wild thing. Like I've, over the past decade, I feel like learned so much about like change is not failure. And I walk in every day to the places that we have or wherever I might be and think, what needs to be different today so that it can be better than it was yesterday? Or what are the things I love here that maybe I can view differently, and how can it, how can change be a positive thing? So, it possibly may not be the last restaurant I close. I don't know, but we got to turn that into something positive. But we also, in that moment, got to say to ourselves, we're doing a disservice to the people in our other restaurants by pretending that this is going to work the way we want it to work. So it was a big decision, and we all took a big deep breath and felt much better after it was done. And Sonny's doing
And you kept
great.
it in the family too. So
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of like a win-win.
Yeah,
Silver lining.
absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Steve?
When do you decide? I mean, I'm when you're borrowing money from investors, right? I mean, there's I too am in therapy about people pleasing, and so whether it's the staff, the investors, the guests, it's a tough decision, and it's one that we were fortunate that every employee at the restaurant we closed, because we're so short-staffed, we absorbed every single person into our other restaurants. So from that perspective, and honestly, that was one of the driving forces for me personally that made it okay. Now, I had to go sit with investors and say, I lost your money, and that's never a great conversation. Fortunately, they had invested in things with me that were working. So on balance, I was doing okay, but it's tough. It's emotional. You feel like a failure. The local, the eater, everything. I mean, everybody jumps on it. The Indigo Road.
Oh, I know.
You're in the press, and it hurts. I mean, it hurts. Listen, I've never talked, Ashley and I have talked, I've never talked to somebody that owns a restaurant that hasn't stared at a ceiling when they've had a slow night or a bad P&L and thought, what was I thinking? I'm a failure. Who in the world did I think I was? And then the next month, it's just this incredible roller coaster ride. But for me, it was about protecting the people. And when I knew I could do that, then I was okay to have the conversation with the investors.
One of the things that's interesting about being multi-unit, and I just had this conversation the other day that's awesome, is that when you have someone who, from the employee position, who isn't a great fit for one spot, it really is an amazing thing to have that conversation that maybe you would be awesome over here. Let's look for opportunities in these other places. And I think that's just another, what defines one shop, what defines one shop's opportunities for success may be different in another place we have. So I think that's
Yeah. I haven't closed a restaurant, but we have restaurants that succeed more than others. And the ones that are less successful financially, you need to do two things. You need to drive revenue and cut costs, right? That's a pretty simple thing. Yeah. And I think that the day we close a restaurant will be the moment where the actions we've taken to cut costs or the ones that we've taken to drive revenue are ones that we're no longer proud of. And I think that the moment you start doing things to make something succeed that you can't actually truly stand behind with every ounce of your being, perhaps that's the moment where it's time to move on. And I think it's a great percentage of what we do, of what anyone does when you're in an entrepreneurial role, is making the easy decisions and the difficult decisions and figuring out at the end of the day, what are your non-negotiables, and making sure that whatever the reality you're in, that you never sacrifice those.
Right.
That's right.
I haven't closed a restaurant, but I've certainly questioned myself about it. I was just saying earlier that I asked two investors, both of whom I highly respect, I said, one said to me, Ellen, you know, you could be doing other things that make more money, and you know, maybe you should consider that. And then the other one, I said, do you think I'm crazy? Do you think that I should continue with this venture or not? And he said, well, is there any hope that it could succeed? And I'm like, well, I have this incredible new team and I feel, you know, hopeful. And he said, well, then you know, you should keep trying. And that's a really difficult, you know, like the one really showed me that, like, you know, okay, at some point you may have to like accept this. So one example is, you know, for one of my restaurants, I just ended 20 years of rental, and they jacked up the rent like a ridiculous amount per month. And you know, I've actually come to grips that there's a very high likelihood that one of these places will have to close because there's no way that the rent will be sustainable. That took me almost a year to, like, you know, digest. And then, you know, the issue with trying is at some point I still have to come to grips, and I'm still mentally preparing myself that I might have to tell my investors that I just can't do it. And it's really hard, especially since we're all type A, highly driven, you know, people. You know, that sounds like a great solution. I hope I can find something like that.
Can I switch gears for a second? And I want to talk about social media, and I want to talk about how you use social media, how social media, the thing, has changed how you do business, or if it has. You know, how do you respond to your customers, and what do you do differently about handling your social media?
I am not the right person. No, we say all the time in our company to everyone as individuals, figure out what your superpower is and lean into that, and also figure out what you're really not that good at, and don't answer the question when you're on a panel. I'm not good at social media.
Okay.
Well, we have tried in-house and outside assistance with social media. I think obviously it's really important for the brand, and you know, I'm still learning. I don't know everything about social media. Some of my younger teammates, you know, they're amazing. They can like whip up a story in no time. But obviously, you know, for certain of our brands, it's really important, and other ones, you know, like Fork, maybe the audience is slightly older, so you know that Instagram might not be the right thing. But you know, what we're trying to figure out is how to measure the return on investment. And you know, I just learned something from Steve today. But you know, really trying to analyze and determine how to best make it all work together in our marketing strategy.
I think it's incredibly powerful. I think probably everyone up here works to have a very positive social media platform. There will always be, you asked a question about maybe folks commenting or negative.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So we always work to, if it's an actual situation that has occurred in one of our restaurants, then we want to move it off social media to solve the issue with the guest.
That's right.
Other than that, there have been a handful of occasions where I take 24 hours to respond and send a response. I only respond if someone has attacked the values or rights of the people who work in our places, and or if it's an opportunity to, you know, bring more respect to the work that we do as an industry, because I think that as leaders, I think that we need to stand up for those things when, you know, I think last year I got one that was shut up and cook, or be quiet and cook,
Right.
or,
Yeah.
you know, after posting a picture of myself and Michelle Obama.
Well.
And
if you post any picture of Michelle Obama, you're absolutely going to get that.
Yeah,
That's supposed to have
but
a
you
light
know,
outside the kitchen.
everyone's entitled to their own opinion.
That's true.
But don't tell me what's not my
Right.
my realm, or my, you know, my right to celebrate. Two other things about social media. When we talk about this intensive interviewing, we absolutely social media stalk candidates before we call them for an interview to see, you know, what they put on Facebook, what they celebrate about themselves, and in some cases that would definitely be a deterrent to bring that person in for an interview. The other thing that I really find a lot of joy from social media is following our team and seeing them like living their lives and traveling and eating and cooking at home and hanging out together or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's a powerful thing, and I'm excited and I'm happy it exists. There was a moment in time where it was like, what is this shit? This is crazy.
Well,
it was all
you
so
hear that?
negative and everyone
You hear
found
that,
a
Will?
voice.
No.
So-
Hey, to be clear, I recognize its power, and we hire people that are better at it and delegate and trust.
Ours
I'm
is done
just not the
internally
person
by
that-
talented people, but yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you. You follow a bunch of people that work for you, and you
thought that's
look at
pretty
their social
cool.
media accounts before the interview. Has there been an occasion where they're working for you, and then you're like, oh, hell no?
Most
and
definitely.
then,
Most definitely.
Yes,
And we,
absolutely,
that's in our, that's in our.
seriously, how do you
handbook,
deal with that?
That you're,
in the employee
a
handbook.
representative of the restaurant. Everyone, So if yes, if there are things we've had HR sit downs with very uncomfortable ones where you've got the photo that was posted and what was written, and it's generally like, oh yeah, I didn't really think about that.
That's hard.
But I don't think we've ever had to let anyone go over anything like that. But there have been, and folks don't always realize the reach and what they represent.
But I think that's a teachable moment,
It
because
is.
I think that if you're training them and you're training them how to be managers and they're in the restaurant, then you're helping them to evolve as individuals outside of the restaurant. So,
Absolutely.
and the more that you help them outside, the more that they will help you inside.
Sure.
Yeah. Steve, you have a big story.
I mean, listen, when you think about marketing, advertising, it's all digital, boosted posts. So I'm very much a fan of celebrating our people, which all of us do on our social media channels, sharing our values, sharing what we're about. And I think it's a really great platform. We should never engage in negative back and forth on social. If somebody's had a legitimately bad experience, I find that they will get off social media and they will engage with you. I also find that's about 10% of the people that are going to say something negatively about you on social media. Some people just want to rant. But we respond 100% to every comment, positive and negative, because we also want to reinforce, hey, thank you. We're so glad you enjoyed Sally's service. Happy you, and then now you can retag stories, and that makes people. So there's this whole world, and as a guy that's turning 50 this year, it's the 25-year-olds that I'm hiring to manage. I mean, it's the younger generation understands this at a level that I certainly don't. And as we age, we continue to look. Our industry is changing at such a rapid rate right now. I'm continuing to look at the next generation. Well, what do y'all think?
Right.
I don't need to be the old dude coming up with the idea. I mean, we work in a business of youth. It is a young business. It always will be. And
We're going to open this up to questions really quickly, but Steve, I want you to talk about your passionate project, Ben's Friends.
Sure, thank you.
And just because I was really moved, I saw your TED Talk. He did a TED Talk.
Wow.
Will you talk about that?
Sure. So everybody in our industry is talking about mental health right now. I mean, that's not a new surprise. 2.5 years ago, we had a chef, Ben Murray, who I had opened a restaurant with. We had lost touch. He came back to us. He helped us open a restaurant out of town. So we were putting him up in a hotel. I did not know that Ben had been in and out of detox 6 different times in the time that we were apart. My TED Talk, I'm a person in recovery. I'm an addict. I got sober in the restaurant business in 2001 at a time that that's just at a time when getting sober in our business was almost absurd, and really has been, but that's not what this is about. So Ben relapsed, Ben committed suicide in the hotel room 2.5 years ago that we had put him up in. And, ironically and sadly, as a person in this industry that loves, literally physically, this industry saved my life through an intervention of people that cared about me. We launched a weekly support group called Ben's Friends, which is, it seeks to help people that are struggling with addiction. It's run by people that are already sober. And the really cool thing is we're about 2.5 years old. We absolutely are still figuring it out. The media has embraced, there was an article in the LA Times last week. We've gone from one, we're in 6 cities, we'll be in 12 cities by the end of the year. We'll be in 24 cities by next year. And it's just this movement, and it's all chefs, sober chefs. And what happens is Gabrielle Rucker in Portland, Le Pigeon, read an article about Ben's Friends, calls up, I want to start at Ben's Friends. And so it's just, and I've said this a lot, I've been very blessed and fortunate to have successful businesses. There's nothing that will ever touch. We have people that are now 2 years off of heroin, you know, because they knew to go to Ben's Friends. And there's no amount of restaurants I'm ever gonna open that will touch that. But it's not just, you know, Kat Kinsman's talking about chefs, her site, Chefs with Issues. I just love that, you know, we spend every night taking care of other people, and I feel like we're finally learning to take care of ourselves. And I think that is, I just think there's nothing that I mean, I love cuisine, I love hospitality, I love service. There's nothing I'm more excited about than helping people learn to live a better life.
Yeah,
So,
thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
Because I know that you've talked about the culture changing in the kitchen a little bit. So you want to jump up?
Sure. I was just going to mention, I've mentioned this to Steve before, but there's a Ben's Friends in Raleigh, and it's been such a powerful thing this is something that we face more often than not in our industry, and to be a leader and to talk with someone who comes to you and is vulnerable to the issues that they're having, and to have a place to send them where they feel comfortable that isn't, you know, nothing on AA, but that's a harder conversation to say, maybe you should go to AA. That feels a lot more daunting than saying, maybe you should sit down with a group of industry professionals who are going through the same thing that you're going through. And it's just a whole different level of comfort. And I would just encourage you guys, if you're in a community where Ben's Friends and Steve's work is not there yet, to talk to him and figure out how to get it there, because it's just been a tremendous tool, and we're super grateful for it.
Well, thank you. We literally need 2 sober people and a place to have a meeting to start. I mean, and then we'll come, and it requires very little. But anyway, this isn't a soapbox about that. But
it should
thank
be.
you.
No, I mean, but
thank you,
part of
thank you
the
for
industry.
asking
So I
that.
think that you know, I appreciate you talking about it and you following up, Ashley. I'd like to open it up to questions. Anybody? I never thought I'd be pulling my. This is the largest I've ever been. Anybody's inside thought that came up? Any questions? Yes.
I was going to ask the panel, because I've also firmly believe that you can train hospitality amongst your team, and hearing stories about you know, the rise of minimum wage or with Ben's Friends, I think a lot of that stems from not only hospitality to the guests, but also hospitality toward the staff and empathy with each other. So I wanted to ask the panel, how do you encourage both hospitality and empathy amongst your teams?
I'm smiling at our executive chef of Death and Taxes in the back, because empathy was our most recent leadership conversation. And you know, I think it's an easy thing. I think it requires some vulnerability, you know, and that's been sort of a running theme for us now for a couple of years in our conversation. But you know, talking about it and getting folks comfortable talking to each other and understanding, I think that really sits at the core of hospitality. And to your point, I also believe, I don't think it's trained. I think it's experienced. And to your point, that sometimes is what folks are missing, who have like razor sharp steps of service, all the skills, but they're not connecting because it's not because they don't want to make people feel the gifts of hospitality. It's because they don't feel it themselves. So I think that's the opportunity, is helping folks to understand what it feels to experience tremendous hospitality.
We have I'm sure many people do, we have a discounted dining program where, you know, we want our staff to experience the hospitality at all our restaurants, and to come in and for us to be able to like shower them with hospitality so that they do feel that way. I think that that's an important part. And even during the training process, we try to teach that and to have them experience, our manager taking care of them or having another team member take care of them. But I think, it's just like any other business. Empathy has to come from obviously the top and from other managers. And I think that sometimes those uncomfortable moments where you can really bring two people together who didn't see eye to eye and really help them see each other from the other perspective. I mean, our industry is filled with people from all different cultures and all different socioeconomic backgrounds. It's inevitable that people may not see eye to eye, and to try to figure out ways to, through staff meal or, cultural sharing or whatever, all that contributes to creating empathy.
We probably have time for one more question. Yes, you're in the center.
And for a long time, I've thought that it's an old, antiquated system, and one day it was going to change. And I'm getting the feeling that we might be on the cusp of change, because individual municipalities around the country are setting their own minimum wage. They're writing rules about how we can distribute tips and whether we can share with the back of the house or not. A comment was mentioned about modified table service restaurants that are eliminating servers because of the disparity between the front of the house. You mentioned a comment about another system in Minneapolis. Where do you think we'll be in 10 years? Is this the opportunity for change? In 10 years, at the 40th annual conference of this, where will we be? Or will we be with the same system and talking about this the same way we are today?
I think it's a great question. I think we'll be in a different place, but like when Danny made the switch, like that was so terrifying to me. And thinking about in my community, if we did that, because it's one thing that you're managing the experience of the folks you employ, but then the whole ocean of folks who eat in your restaurants, how do you do it thoughtfully, and and as I mentioned earlier, each new restaurant I think is a great opportunity to, approach it in a different way. But I think that in 10 years, you'll see very different models all over the country, to your point, and all the different municipalities. I don't know if it'll be one answer, but I think that my hope is that in 10 years, there's much more equality in pay between the entire restaurant.
I think it's going to be a struggle, though. Speaking on behalf of New York's most recent experience, what she's saying, what Danny did when he went to service included or hospitality included and raised the prices and then basically set the servers at a fixed rate and then gave the people in the kitchen a higher rate, required that the prices were raised because of the way the laws work. We can't add a 20% gratuity and then distribute it like that. The prices just need to be higher. And I think of the 20 restaurants, Union Square Hospitality Group excluded, that switched to that model, 15 of them have switched back. And it hasn't worked for two reasons. One, the guests think they're paying more even though it's the same. And so what they end up doing is the average checks have just gone down in those restaurants. And two, the servers are just not used to it, and then they go to other places where they think they can make more money. We do that at 11 Madison Park, but I don't know that we'd ever be able to do it at the Nomad right now. And I think one of the things that's standing in the way of equality in pay really stems from the fact that a lot of the people that are making the laws about how people that work in restaurants should be paid don't actually understand how the people that work in restaurants and restaurants generally work. And so I'm generally an optimist. And so my instinct is to be like, yeah, dude, in 10 years, it's going to be awesome. I don't actually think it's going to be that much better unless there's a significant tide change in terms of how the people that actually make these decisions have a heightened understanding of how restaurants work. I mean, the idea that minimum wage continues to go up and the servers make more and more and more money. In Los Angeles, our servers make $15.75 plus tips. you can't charge that much more. And so the people that end up getting shortchanged the most are the managers, because they don't get a raise. And then when you talk about culture and actually giving someone, turning hospitality from a job into a profession, if you've actually set something up in such a way where there's no financial benefit to actually trying to grow your career. I mean, the fact that we've accepted in restaurants for so long that when you get promoted from a server to a manager, you have to take a pay cut.
A big pay cut.
It's just sad, and so I think when we talk about pay disparity, oftentimes it's kitchen versus dining room, and that is something that needs to be addressed. I think one of the other one that we don't talk about nearly as often is leadership to hourly, and what an utterly flawed system that is. And I've had servers that are now in their 50s that wish they'd taken the leap when they were in their 30s. But they never did because they could never afford to, and now their feet are given out. And so I think there's a lot of change that needs to take place. But here's the issue, is that the industry is the largest employer in America, and the managers are not the largest number, it's the staff. And so when people want to make a splash when they're proposing legislation raising these rates is like the biggest way for them to say I'm pro the people, when in reality they're achieving the opposite.
Yeah.
So it's a lovely downer way to end.
Can I add a little bit of cynicism to it?
Yeah.
No, I'm generally an optimist as well. You would never open as many restaurants unless you were either delusional or incredibly optimistic. And I believe in the good in all of us all the time. I'm not Danny Meyer, and by the way, Danny is a mentor. He's a friend. He's somebody I hold in high regard. If I tomorrow raised my prices 30% the way Danny did, I would be out of business. And so I feel like sometime when this conversation gets going, it's sort of like, well, we just need to do this and we just need to do that. And I go back to the hamburger at the Macintosh. It's a pretty good burger. It's 15 bucks. If that burger is $25, is the general consumer in Charleston still coming to buy my burger? And then I'm having to, customer by customer, say, yeah, but you don't have to tip. And where is that gap? And if you're the guy that borrowed the millions of dollars to open the restaurant, that's a very scary proposition. And what I've said to to many people in Danny's organization is, will you please show me the business model so I can learn? Because there is a business model that's got to work, but I don't know what it is. And it scares me to death. Our rent is not going down. Our raw material costs are not going down. And so it's easy to sort of say, we need to do away with this. And all I would ask is if somebody could show me how to do it, I'll do it. But I don't have a lot of success stories right now.
And by the way, the reason I said all this stuff I said is because I feel that sometimes people are waiting for such large sweeping change to do anything. And I think, listen, the opportunities we have to just make our world a slightly better version of itself every single day without waiting for some big foundational thing to move are endless.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we focus on those as well.
I'd say the positive is that everyone on this stage is going to be working on it for the next 10 years.
Absolutely.
And many people in this room as well. So hopefully that is brings a little hope to the challenge.
I think that
hope
it's
your
going to
model
have to
works,
be some
because I
sort of
wanna come learn.
legislative change. And, maybe this is putting American Express on the spot, but I mean, like, these type of conferences are so great because, we're all small entrepreneurs and we don't have the opportunity to really, cross-pollinate that much. It would be great in maybe the National Restaurant Association, but really there's going to be a paradigm shift in our industry. I mean, we didn't even talk about the wage pressure of of all the people who aren't falling under the minimum wage because of labor shortages and because the minimum wage is high. Everybody else has to also be increased. So, we have to figure it out. And it would be great to have somebody helping to help us figure it out.
You got it?
You got it?
Yeah.
What I would do is, Ellen and the rest of you, because I don't want to try to influence something which I know little about, in terms of your business model, if you come up
We're actually thinking you just run with it.
Yeah. You can
I
figure
feel
it
like
out.
we've shared our thoughts. Just
It's
take
on
it away,
tape.
Ron.
Come tell us what
Review
you're
the
doing.
tape. Review the tape. I think this has been a perfect place to end because I think people have things to think about going forward. Will, Ellen, Ashley, Steve, thank you so much. Thank you all to American Express for having me. Thank you all for getting up. And I wish you a wonderful Food and Wine Festival. Thank you.